Welcome back to Media7. We're looking at crime's prominent place in the news with Manukau lawyer and commentator Katrina McLennan, Truth chief reporter Jock Anderson and journalist Jeremy Rose. The debate over crime and punishment is one in which members of the public have a voice, and sometimes a visceral one. Simon Pound went to measure the public perception.
New Zealanders were once described as the passionless people by Gordon McLaughlin. But judging by the Herald's Your Views page, there are some passions bubbling away. On these New Zealand Herald internet pages, people are invited to anonymously pass comment on issues, from the phasing out of lollies to what should be done to control crime in New Zealand. This topic elicited hundreds of responses, like send them to Saudi Arabia, death punishment, kill the scumbags. The majority were angry and many expressed a wish for violence to be enacted on criminals. Theft, hands chopped, robbery, beaten until near-death experience, rape, sexual organs removed, murder, death. And so on and off with their heads. Where did this love of getting biblical on criminals come from? Has it anything to do with the fact it's anonymous? Let's ask a psychologist.
There will always be a small percentage of people who hype things up and ramp things up for the, just for the effect. But I think for most people, if they're expressing a view online, it probably is their view.
But is it rational? Should people be this angry?
It's probably people who are pushed to the limit in terms of seeing these heinous acts perpetuated over and over again, and they get to a point where they say, no more, I am so fed up with this. I am going to do something. I'm going to take responsibility and I will do something.
So the media are actually racking people up. But there aren't any good stories to tell, right? Wrong. Tim Clark is chair of Restorative Justice Aotearoa. You've probably never heard of him. His organisation actually tries to address the effects of crime on a face-to-face basis. But they can't get on the news.
By and large, getting reports about good news into the media is a struggle for us.
Tim believes that if the work organisations like his did got the same attention as the Lock 'em Up Brigade, well, people might not be so angry.
We know that on a regular basis, those victims of offences actually aren't looking for harsher penalties. They're looking for certainty that whatever happened won't happen again. They're looking for some sort of direct recompense for what's happened to them. They're looking for answers to questions, and the whole kind of lock 'em up for longer doesn't often even enter the debate.
So maybe every time you see a crime report about increasing sentences, ask, why aren't I seeing a report about rehabilitation or drug and alcohol counselling? And whether those actions might work better than just locking crims up longer or cutting bits off of them. But if the people aren't angry and scared, well, what will be left for politicians and media to exploit?
Simon Pound with that report. Katrina, one thing that always occurs to me when I read the Herald's Your Views column whenever it's about crime is some of these people are going to be jurors. Do you think they actually behave and think like that once they get onto juries, or is there something different going on when they're behind the keyboard?
I think probably the anonymity of the keyboard is a great thing, and I think when you're on a jury, obviously you're with other people, and I think jurors do take their responsibilities seriously. Probably really the key point that I'd pick out from Simon Pound's report, though, is that what all victims say is that we want this never to happen to anyone else again, but the media doesn't pick up on that, and that's where poor Tim Clark's got such an uphill battle, because I quite agree there are some people who just need to be kept in jail for the safety of the community, but for the rest, if we really want to prevent crime, which I think we do, we should put all the money into the resources from 5 to 7-year-old children. It costs us $80,000 to keep a prisoner in jail for a year. If you put the money in at the beginning, you could do away with about 90% of crime. If people, came with me to the Manukau cells every Monday morning, it's just a parade of, helplessness and hopelessness and desperately sad. It's nearly all young men. They can't read and write.
But that's not the public mood, and it's certainly not what politicians pick up. I mean, is it, John?
No, it's not. And I have to take some issue here. I think a person who commits crime makes a conscious decision to commit crime. There may be factors status and their background. They might not have a job. Most of them are on benefits. I don't know how many thousand charge sheets I've read through in courts where the occupation of the person who's battered the living daylights out of someone is a sickness beneficiary or unemployed or something. I really have no time, quite frankly, for the bleeding hearts in the society who say, oh, these poor people, we've got a handout, help them up, be compassionate. They go out, they deliberately commit crime. Most other people don't commit crime.
And
a lot of good people never commit
your
crime.
paper pulled up Phil Goff when he announced his ban the gangs thing and flew over Mike Rand from South Australia. You saw that as a political stunt, didn't you?
Of course it's a political stunt. It only happens every 3 years. There are all sorts of other stunts that they pull out. And whoever becomes the next government, that will disappear. That will disappear. It will go again.
I mean, I'm not sure whether you saw the New Zealand Herald editorial from last week, where it went through slamming National's no parole policy as a political stunt that would not work, and then in the end said, but it's all right because they won't do it once they get into office. What do you make of that?
Well, I mean, the politicians will do what they do, but I think there is an argument, certainly in some cases, for no parole. But again, that's another political stunt. The same as Rodney Hyde's, zero tolerance. I mean, what does that actually mean? How many library books do you have to have overdue before they cut your hands off? I don't know.
I think it's 3.
Stop reading. But these are definitely political stunts. But definitely something, I think, much more severe has to be done in terms of penalties. It was very interesting the other day in the Stuff poll, which I look at, and they had one on the death penalty, which followed people ranting and raving about after the National released its policy. And they had an interesting poll. Several thousand people, it's non-scientific, took part in it. 53% favoured the reintroduction of the death penalty.
But why am I not surprised? It's a self-selecting poll on the internet.
It is the only poll that Stuff has done in recent years that mysteriously vanished off their website in the afternoon. And they can't give me a reason why, because I've done a story about it.
You've done the story. Good. Jeremy, another factor in that report of Simon's was the presence of the Sensible Sentencing Trust in Garth McVicar. Are you aware of a victims' rights group having quite as prominent a role as that organisation does in New Zealand? Because it seems to drive the news.
He does. He's incredibly effective. And journalists around the country seem to have him on speed dial.
I'm sure they do, actually,
and
literally.
They don't seem to pick up on... I mean, I was amazed when he put out a press release saying in support of those truck drivers blocking roads. They were paid rent-a-demo. I mean, they're literally being paid by corporations overseas in the Wellington case. And he's putting out a press release, Mr. Law and Order, supporting them. And no journalist in the country that I know of questioned him on it and said, why is it okay for these guys to break the law?
And I think one of the other things he's been able to do is keep the Bailey Kurariki case at the forefront of the media for, 7 years? And Rita Croskery comes out, every time she comes out and says something, she gets reported. It's quite an unusual situation because, I mean, you'd know this as well as anyone, there were older and far more culpable youths involved in that homicide.
But also, I mean, if you want to talk about that specific case, the Principal Youth Court Judge Andrew Beecroft recently gave a speech in which he specifically talked about that case, talked about what had gone wrong and talked about what lessons should have been learned. But of course, have we had that reported in the media? No, we haven't. And, he regularly gives speeches. They're 30 to 50 pages long, very detailed prescriptions for stopping young people getting into trouble, but it just doesn't seem to be sexy in media terms.
And he often seems to be expressing frustration that he can't get in the headlines.
Yeah, absolutely. He gave a speech a few months ago and he said 10 ways to turn a young person into a criminal. He was turning it obviously back on itself, but I think that was really just an indication of his frustration that he can't get any constructive message out there.
Well, I've got the answer for that. I think these judicial figures, whoever they may be, should stop handing out 30 and 50-page press releases and actually answer some questions from reporters. Simple questions, yes or no answers. No, they won't do that. They won't talk to the public correctly or succinctly through the media. So they can't whinge and moan if the media get landed with 30 pages of apologetic waffle, which may be worthy and well-meaning, but it has really very little place in the modern media.
So journalists should be able to read a 30-page report, surely, and they should be able to distill it. That's part of our job.
No, I want to question the judge. I want to ask him my questions. I don't want to put into
But wouldn't
paper
you have a better chance of getting your interview if you say, I've read your 50-page speech?
Yeah, and I think you can do
Isn't
better.
that where you put
so
in the
the
work?
challenge is out to Judge Beecroft and any of the others. You know, they can find me. I'm quite happy to talk to them.
Because, I mean, we're nearly out of time, but it does strike me, and this is the reason we did this show, is that every time we seem to be seeing Garth McVicker and Peter Williams sitting across a desk, and it's like, well, a cat and a dog. We know what's going to happen. How do we move beyond that?
You've got to get away from this. It's slogan reporting. They're easy, cheap. You know, you're right. You're on speed dial. You know, you want something quick, here's the names, ring them. It's cheap. I make no apologies for that. That happens to be the way it works.
What would you like to see happen, Katrina?
Where do I start?
More journalists in court more often?
Yep, and also that we put resources into journalists in New Zealand because, you know, I think over the past 20 years, you know, we've just lost so many experienced journalists from journalism, and we've got a huge number of very young journalists who don't have a background, don't have the experience, perhaps don't have the skills to question someone who's difficult to question.
I agree with that, yeah.
Well, not for the first time we come down to resources in journalism as being the problem. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for this week. Thank you to our panellists, Katrina McLennan, Jock Anderson and Jeremy Rose, and thank you for watching. We'll be back with Media7 at the same time next week. Until then, goodbye.